Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. You know, I'm sure you've all noticed, as I have, that since the very beginning of this war, the diplomats are in a frenzy to stop the IDF from finishing Hamas. The president of France, Sarkozy, himself went to Israel. Vladimir Putin weighed in on his worry about humanitarian concerns for the people in Gaza. Vladimir Putin, a great humanitarian. The UN voted immediately for a ceasefire. And we might believe that these are all decent humanitarians concerned with the situation of people in Gaza, except for one thing. Where were these humanitarians when for 8 years, 8,000 missiles fell on Israel? Where were these humanitarians when 10,000 Israelis have been murdered over the last 2 decades in the worst campaign of terror that the world has ever seen, in bus bombings, in suicide bombings, in disco bombings? I'll tell you where they were. They were nowhere to be found. Where were these humanitarians when the people in Sderot had to sleep in bomb shelters every day for the last 8 years? Nowhere. And they say that Israel, which has taken more care in this campaign to safeguard human life, have you ever seen another army that has 3-hour breaks during a war to let in humanitarian assistance? And they're worried that Israel is in violation of some international law. They don't tell us what international law, but they're worried about this. And we might believe that they're sincerely worried about international law, except for one thing. Where were these guardians of international law in the last 2 years when Iran threatened genocide against a fellow member of the United Nations? Have they one time asked to expel Iran from the UN for this direct violation of the UN Charter and Convention on Genocide? And now that the IDF, with no help from these diplomats, has defeated Hamas and called a unilateral ceasefire, all the presidents of Europe have rushed to Israel to pretend that they're relevant, to take credit for it. But they will not succeed, they will not achieve behavior modification with Hamas, because there are enemies with whom you can negotiate and enemies whom you must confront and destroy. But they say Hamas was fighting Israel. They characterize it as a war between Hamas and the IDF, with the people of Gaza, the innocent people of Gaza, stuck in the middle. And that might sound like a legitimate characterization of the conflict, except for one thing. These people in Gaza voted for Hamas. They elected a terrorist organization with a genocidal platform, and people are responsible for the choices they make and the leaders they choose. When the Germans looked over their cities in 1945 and saw them bombed into rubble, they knew that they had no one else to blame but themselves for voting for Hitler in 1932. Likewise, the Palestinians in Gaza have no one to blame except themselves for voting for Hamas in 2006. And they reap what they sow. They teach a Nazi-like genocidal philosophy, which talks about wiping out another country. They enthusiastically supported Hamas. They are not innocent victims or some neutral third party in this conflict. The Palestinians are the instigator of this conflict, and they have been the instigator of this conflict going back 100 years. They worked with the Nazis in World War II. Haj Amin al-Husseini, head of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, cooperated with Hitler on the final solution. And when the rockets were fired for 8 years from their front porches, from their front yard, from their street, from their roof, they knew about it, and they're complicit in it, and they are not innocent third-party victims. They teach their children an education of hate. They carry around keychains with pictures of the suicide bombers, and their pictures are plastered all over the walls. And they are reaping the results of this. But with their viciousness of their hate and their absolute refusal to compromise and accept any Jewish rights in the land of Israel, they have achieved something miraculous in the last month. Hamas has achieved something amazing. They have united the whole of Am Yisrael behind the operation. From the left to the right, there is no member of Knesset that is against it. I've never seen the kind of unity, the kind of morale in the army, the kind of spirit that the Jewish people are displaying. Now, you all know that the government called a unilateral ceasefire, and like many of you, I'm disappointed that once again, on the cusp of victory, they look ready to abandon it at the negotiating table. But there's something I want to tell you. There's an election coming up in Israel on February 10th. And if this government once again throws away the victory of the heroes of the IDF, they will be replaced on February 10th with a government that will not do that. That will achieve what the only possible solution for the situation in Gaza is: absolute victory for Israel and surrender of Hamas, unconditional surrender or annihilation at the hands of the IDF. So we are here today to thank the IDF, because the IDF, the soldiers that are now in the alleys of Gaza, doing the hard job that they're doing in the heart of darkness, they're doing it not only for their own country, they're doing it for Jews everywhere. And they're not only doing it for Jews everywhere, they're doing it for freedom-loving people everywhere. The IDF is fighting not only for the Jews, they're fighting for the Hindus in Mumbai, in Kashmir, in Bali. They're fighting for the Christians and their freedom of religion in Kosovo, in Sudan, in Darfur, in Serbia, in the Philippines. They're fighting in truth for the whole of Western civilization, even while that civilization often vilifies them for doing it. They are fighting in the end of the day so that the future will not belong to Haniya and Nasrallah and Osama bin Laden, but so that the future will belong to the followers of Washington, of Jefferson, and of Martin Luther King. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Devin. And I do recommend everybody go to the Ford Seminary. In 1976 and 1979, he studied in Israel at Jerusalem University.
How wonderful and pleasing it is to see such an assembly of brothers and sisters here today to support Medinat Yisrael, the Free State of Israel. Not all of us are Jews, but we all love Israel. We are Jews and Christians who love freedom, who embrace America's ideals of our inalienable rights to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
If we all stick together, if we bond together, and we understand that we